This tutorial is going to review the integumentary system. So the general functions of the integumentary system are protection from the outside environment. The epidermis is made of that stratified squamous tissue, which are like the overlapping scales, so that keeps us protected from the things on the outside. Thermoregulation. So your sweat glands, hair, blood vessels, all of that works to keep you warm and to also cool your body to keep your temperature regulated. Production of chemicals like oil and sweat, again to kind of tie into thermoregulation. Oil also helps to inhibit the growth of bacteria. Your physical characteristics. Sensory reception. Those are some of the main functions of skin. The epidermis has several different layers. I'll go a little bit more in depth on the back. But each of those layers kind of has a different distinct function, from the stratum basal, which is the layer that is actively dividing, to the stratum granulosum, which is producing keratin. So you have some layers that are dividing. You have some layers that are producing keratin. You have some layers that are flaking off, like the stratum corneum, and then some that are just providing thickness. So if you look back through your notes, you'll see that we've described each of those layers and given kind of some distinct characteristics of each. On the back of the worksheet, I'll talk a little bit more about each layer. The dermis has two distinct layers, the papillary and the reticular. The papillary is the thinnest of the two layers of the dermis. This is what kind of creates your fingerprints. It's that ridged layer. And the reticular is what all of your hair, glands, nerve receptors, that's where all of those are located. Individual differences in skin or your physical characteristics come from a couple of different things. We've talked a little bit about your pigmentation, so you should be able to elaborate more on melanin and keratin, where those come from. That's also found in hair and eye color. Blood supply to your skin will also give different physical characteristics. Your fingerprints from the papillary layer are going to give you different physical characteristics. So all of those different things are going to make your skin different than other people. The integumentary system helps to regulate body temperature. When you get heated, your body releases sweat, and this evaporates to cool your body down. When you are cold, your body raises those hairs using that little muscle, the erector pili muscle, and this helps to trap warm air near your body, so you get goosebumps. UV radiation is damaging to the skin, and we have melanin that helps to naturally protect our body from these UV rays. UV radiation damages the collagen and elastic fibers in our skin, and once those are damaged, they're not going to come back the same way they were before. Melanin, which is produced by melanocytes, helps us to naturally protect ourselves from UV radiation. Hair and nails help to protect our body, so their main function is protection. Hair also plays a role in helping us to regulate temperature. Compare and contrast the different types of glands that you find in our body. So sebaceous glands, those are our oil glands. So those are a little bit different than the apocrine and the merocrine glands. Sebaceous glands are also typically found with attached to a hair follicle. Apocrine are also typically attached to a hair. So that's one thing that these two have in common. They're usually found with a hair. Merocrine and apocrine are sweat glands. That's one thing that these two have in common. Merocrine, however, are just used for thermoregulation. They just cool the body. In skin repair, let's just take a quick look at what happens when you have an injury. So here I have my drawing of a close-up of an injury to skin. So this represents our epidermis up here, and you have an injury that's gone down into the dermis. Immediately when you have a response to injury, or when you have an injury, there's going to be bleeding at the injury site. You're going to have immune system cells that are going to travel to this site of injury and begin inflammation. Inflammation is kind of like your body's way of saying, hey, there's an injury, let's start to bring immune system cells to this area. This is going to start a clot to stop that bleeding once these cells kind of get into action at the site of injury. Stem cells in the stratum basal and in the dermis are cells that can reproduce and form new skin tissue and new connective tissue so that your skin can repair itself. So what's going to happen here is that cells in the stratum basal are going to start to migrate downwards. Migrate down this way, and they're going to divide and start to repair, moving down this way, repairing this, kind of filling in this injury site. After several days, you're going to have fibroblasts, and if we think back to our tissue unit, fibroblasts are the ones that can make the connective tissue fibers. Fibroblasts start coming in, and they're going to start to secrete fibers to start filling in and repairing the dermis. So you've got epidermal cells filling in. You've got dermal cells underneath filling in. This is going to start to kind of fill in from the bottom the injury. Eventually this will scab over. The scab is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you might be left with only a scar, which is connective tissue, or depending on the scar, depending on the severity of the injury, or you may have epidermal cells that can repair and completely close that injury. So if we look at the healing of wounds, epidermal and dermal cells can reproduce because of cells that differentiate, called stem cells. During the first stage of repair, mast cells trigger an inflammatory response. So mast cells are kind of like these alarm cells that say, hey, we have an injury. come help us repair this injury site, in which the following symptoms occur. So they're asking about what happens during inflammation. So think to when you have an injury, what happens? Well, there's redness, pain, swelling. That area might become warm to the touch. All of those things are part of the inflammatory response, and they seem to be kind of annoying to us. This inflammation seems like it's not a good thing, but it's actually your body's way of beginning the immune response. A blood clot will form, which functions to stop bleeding. And then cells in the blank layer divide to replace missing cells. This is the stratum basal layer. The combination of a blood clot, blood vessels, and fibroblast is what we call granulation tissue. And then over time, the scab will be shed and a scar will remain, or new skin, depending on the severity of the injury. The last part about healing of skin or skin repair is about burns. So first degree burns, these are where your epidermis is injured, but you have not injured any of the dermis. So the symptoms here, it's just a red, painful burn. But the burn itself will, or the skin itself will repair. There will be no scarring. So no scarring. This is a burn that will heal. A second degree is a little bit, they go from least worrisome to most worrisome. Second degree, you have the epidermis injured and parts of the dermis are injured. This one's going to blister. That's the significant symptom of a second degree burn if you see blisters. This one will also repair itself with little to no scarring, because the dermis and the epidermis have those stem cells, they can repair themselves. In a third degree burn, you have damaged all of the epidermis and all of the dermis. So this is going to be charred skin. Your nerve receptors have been burned, so nerve receptors are gone. And in this case, the skin will not repair itself. And there will be scarring. So this is what would require a skin graft in order to replace that skin. The labeling looks fairly similar to what you see in the digital textbook and what you see in our packet. Please refer to Blackboard for the labeling answers.